As a rhetorical form, there's nothing like the Jeremiad. At the end of my last book, On a Scale, I let that rhetorical form of rage rip regarding tests of writing ability. Here's what I wrote. The somber test always says no. The uniform apparatus of logic, of censorship, the insistence of the rule, each results in the cycle of prohibition that holds captive student and teacher between legislative power on one side and public censure on the other. Obedience is assured. The sheer power of the system is exercised from innumerable points, from children who find themselves on a conveyor belt of exit exams designed by compromised educational researchers, from parents who have learned to be hypervigilant about the documented success of their children on that belt, from school principals who must answer to superintendents, who must answer to legislators, who are put into office by the voting parents who are too paralyzed with fear about their children's future to do anything but maintain the system. Obedience is assured with every act. In the very moment in which the student, asked to produce evidence of writing ability, lifts the pencil as the proctor announces that only 25 minutes will be allowed. Not a single reviewer noticed. What I needed, clearly, was a role model for the Jeremiad. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, Tolstoy reminded us. True. In Southern families, I need to add, every family is nutty in its own way. My family had my Uncle Lou. Before the age 20, he simply declared that he was unfit for work and that, and here's why he's my role model, someone else would have to take care of him while he pursued his world of ideas. Here was a strategy I never had the courage to adopt. Because mine was a Southern family, he was naturally accommodated. His chief interest was in my father's family's origin, a group claiming Parisian French ancestry, culminating in great-grandmother who kept lit candles in a closet as a shrine to a distinctly French-looking virgin. The family tree he constructed dominated more gumbo than French pastry, however, and chief among the facts were that we were cousins, he claimed, of Huey P. Long, governor of Louisiana. Now here is a model for a Jeremiad rendering sense of warning. Here's Gard Vidal reading from Point-to-Point Navigation.
Though my father disliked most politicians, Huey always made him laugh. The Kingfish, as Long was known, began performing when he stepped out of the elevator in the morning and confronted the day in the form of a desk clerk, a meek young man whom Huey enjoyed lecturing on success, to the young man's embarrassment. Huey would declaim, "Why, when I was your age, I would spend what little idle time I had with an instructive book, not that racing form I see that you're now trying to hide. Of course, I was not given to late-night dissipation in the flesh pots of the District of Columbia. Oh, you can't hide your ruinous habits from me. I can see by the trembling of your hands what demon rum is doing to you." The poor clerk was indeed trembling with terror as the great voice thundered in his ears, and Huey, particularly if an audience had now filled the lobby, would become prayerful as he invoked the lad's aged mother back in Butte, Montana. "I know how each night she prays for your success on her knees, little suspecting that all those hours that should be golden with study are scarlet with vice."
My rage is really quite similar. How on earth did a rhetorical form as elegant as the essay become so transformed into a rule-driven, expectation-numbing, trivial, inelegant, foolish reporting structure, a petty bourgeois system yielding nothing but petty bourgeois ideas, a 5-paragraph monster sucking the life out of every subject it grasps by the throat? You get the idea. Okay, enough is enough. Enough rage for now. With the Jeremiad out of the way, let's see what the essay once was in reference to its creator, Michel de Montaigne. On the left is a passage that contains his famous reference to the essay, translated here as tests. The translation is by Donald M. Frame. Judgment is a tool to use on all subjects and comes in everywhere. Therefore, the tests, the essays, that I make of it here, I use at every sort of occasion. If it is a subject I do not understand at all, Even on that, I assay my judgment, sounding the ford from a good distance, and then finding it too deep for my height, I stick to the bank. And this acknowledgment that I cannot cross over is a token of its action, indeed, one of those it is most proud of. Sometimes in vain and non-existent subject, I try to see if it will find the wherewithal to give it a body, prop it up, and support it. Sometimes I lead it to a noble and well-worn subject, in which it has nothing original to discover, the road being so beaten that it can walk only in others' footsteps. There it plays its part by choosing the way that seems best to it. And of 1,000 paths, it says that this one or that one was the most widely chosen. I take the first subject that chance offers. They are all equally good to me, and I never plan to develop them completely, for I don't see the whole of anything, nor do those who promise to show it to us. Of 100 members and faces that each thing has, I take one, sometimes only to lick it, sometimes to brush the surface, sometimes to pinch it to the bone. I give it a stab, not as wide but as deep as I know how. And most often, I like to take them from some unaccustomed point of view. I would venture to treat some matter thoroughly if I knew myself less well, scattering a word here, there, another, samples separated from their context, dispersed, without a plan and without a promise. I am not bound to make something of them or to adhere to them myself without varying where I please and giving myself up to doubt and uncertainty, and my ruling quality, which is ignorance, every moment reveals us. There is nothing inelegant here at all. The voice is witty and urbane, like the voice of Montaigne's best student, Gore Vidal. There is humility here in which ideas are tested, not proven. When a road is well done, a topic overdeveloped, the essay, here it is literally anthropomorphized, leads toward a path of investigation. Those who promise to show us the whole of anything will mislead us. So Montaigne won't claim to treat his subject at all with wholeness. He claims ignorance. And although all of this is said with urbane irony, the point is taken. Total reality, indeed the truth, is not able to be captured by anyone at any time. As a result, small contextualized efforts, gestures, at understanding is all we may hope for. As Montaigne later writes of in Repentance, if my mind could gain a firm footing, I would not make essays, I would make decisions. But it is always an apprenticeship and on trial. On the right side of the slide, you'll see Roberta Camp's definition of writing, one of my favorites. Here, in a sense, is Montaigne's context of meaning, the idea of process, the need for reflection. 400 years later, the idea of the essay endures. So what am I objecting to? Well, I'm objecting because while the idea endures, the practice does not. As I noted in Act 1, Paul Heilkler, in his 2006 essay, 20 Years In, an essay in 2 parts, had the same epiphany that many of us have had over the past 5 years or so. The shifting realizations that many of us are experiencing is due to the presence of computer-mediated communication. And that way the students have begun to use that means as an expression to yield just the kind of expression Montaigne desired, just the kind of expression I noted and captured in Act 2 of these series. Let me show you the problem with the essay as it presently exists. Here is an example of the new writing section of the SAT reasoning test. Here is an essay with a score of 6. The student writes, memories act as both a help and a hindrance to the success of someone. Many people advise you to learn from the past and apply those memories so that you can effectively succeed by avoiding repeating your past mistakes. On the other hand, people who get too caught up with the past are unable to move on to the future. Elie Wiesel's memory, Night, perfectly exemplifies the double nature of memory. Wiesel, a Jewish man, suffered heavily throughout the Holocaust, and Night is rife with horrific descriptions of his experience. Those memories help to spread the view of what life was like. Through recounting these memories, Wiesel is able to educate world readers about the atrocities committed in hopes that the same blatant violations of human rights never occur or never repeated again. Through reliving the Holocaust through his writing, Wiesel was inspired to become proactive in the battle for civil rights. Some would point to his peaceful actions and the sales of his book and label him as a success. Despite the important recounting of such memories, Wiesel acknowledges that damage that memories can also cause. Following his liberation from Auschwitz concentration camp, Wiesel was a bitter, jaded man. He could not even write night until several years later. The end of the novel describes Wiesel's gradual but absolute loss of faith throughout the experience. His past experiences haunted him for several years, rendering him passive. It was not until he set aside his past that he could even focus on the future. He had remained so consumed with the pain and damage caused in the past, he may never have had achieved the success that he has attained. Overall, Wiesel's experiences exemplify the importance of the past as a guide. Wiesel's past experiences helped to guide him in later life, but it was not until he pushed them aside that he could move on. To me, this means that you should rely on your past without letting it control you. Allow your past to act as a guide while making sure that you are also living in the present and looking to the future. Now, students are told that their short essay will measure their ability to organize and support ideas clearly, develop and support the main idea, and use appropriate word choice. And the score of 6 is the highest score that would be awarded by readers. The student essay reminds us to get on with life, just like Elie Wiesel did, and just put stuff like the Holocaust behind you. What text did this student read? The version that ended, "Then one morning I woke up and thought, today I'm going to make sure that I live in the present and look to the future." How can we align this essay with the words of Wiesel that he himself placed in his preface to the new translation of Night by his wife? For the survivor who chooses to testify, Wiesel reminds us it is clear. His duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget would not only be dangerous, but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. The essay, the scoring guide tells us, demonstrates clear and consistent mastery and receives a 6. How can this be? How can both student and reader so naively reduce the Holocaust to an example of patterned resolution? To remain silent and indifferent is the greatest sin of all. If the writing products are patterned, so too is the investigative process. Here's a cite from Cornell University regarding what it claims are the 7 steps of the research project. Key here is expressed in step 1. Identify and develop your topic. The student guide concludes. So, my students conclude, the thinking work is done before the research part begins. A student can only conclude, therefore, that the research process is external to writing and thinking process. A student can only conclude that research is something contrived by mean-spirited, petty-minded English teachers. No wonder my students, including the seniors, ask the famous question, how many books and articles do I have to put in the paper? If research is presented as something that begins after a topic is identified and developed, then what else can the student conclude except that research is nothing but mere stuffing? How did we get here? None of us really, in our heart of hearts, is going to place blame on the Republican and Democratic Party, the legislative processes that impacts education, or the way that we envision American education. Thinking folks know that Essay 6 and the process that made it are both reflective of a deeper view of consciousness, of what we really talk about when we talk about writing. And so because ideas have values, let's take a look at the frames of reference offered by Hegel on the left and Francis Fukuyama on the right. Because the title of this podcast series may recall to some Fukuyama's The End of History, published in the same year the Berlin Wall fell, let's reflect for a moment on Fukuyama's recollection of Hegel. He writes, for Hegel, all human behavior in the material world, and hence all human history, is rooted in a prior state of consciousness. This consciousness may not be explicit and self-aware, as our modern political doctrines, but may rather take the form of religion or simple cultural or moral habits. And yet this realm of consciousness in the long run necessarily becomes manifest in the material world, indeed creates the material world in its own image. Consciousness is cause and not effect, and can be developed autonomously from the material world. Hence, the real subject underlying the apparent jumble of current events is the history of ideology. Well, the problem here is that there is a teleological element to both Hegel and to Fukuyama. As a result, certain elements are seen as insignificant in the march of thesis and antithesis toward ultimate synthesis. In the contemporary world, Fukuyama wrote in 1989, only Islam has offered a theocratic state as political alternative to both liberalism and communism, but the doctrine has little appeal for non-Muslims, and it is hard to believe that the movement will take on any universal significance. The idea, Fukuyama suggests, is that liberal democracy signals the final form of government and thus the end of history. In essence, here we have nothing but teleological triumphalism. There is a process. We are both the creators and recipients of its blessings, and the liberal house we inhabit is the European project, a house for the last man who emerges at the end of history, as Fukuyama wrote in May of 2006. In essence, we have teleological triumphalism. We can sense its blindness in the essay on Elie Wiesel's Night. We can feel it in the ceaseless, triumphal 7 steps described to the research project. In essence, something very important has been left behind. To find out what are the kinds of thinking may lead us away from triumphal, reductionistic thought, let's turn to 3 other thinkers. Louise Rosenblatt, pictured on the left. Her kind of functionalism was at one with the interpretation of experience that Dewey had argued for in his famous 1896 paper, The Reflex Arc Concept in Psychology. In that paper, Dewey had brought into play the realization that descriptions are only constructs, analyses that may not finally be valid. Traditional wisdom, Dewey holds, begins as, for example, a child sees a candle flame, imagines that it may be pleasurable to play with the flame, and thus is burned and withdrawn his hand. Yet this account assumes that the parts are prior to the whole. In fact, it is only the whole environment that matters. There's no stimulus and response, no desire to play with the flame and the burn. As Dewey put it, the burn is the original scene. There is no arc. There is instead a circle. The circle, Dewey wrote, is a coordination, some of whose members have come into conflict with each other. There is then no cause and effect, no stimulus and response. There are instead acts, which Dewey writes are strictly correlative and contemporaneous. Influenced by Dewey, in Literature as Exploration, Rosenblatt declared that the aims of literature, to create individuals capable of working out their own solutions and making their own judgment through sensuous, intellectual, and emotional responses to texts, are essentially aesthetic ones. Following Rosenblatt's thought allows us to recenter our perception away from utilitarian triumphalism towards contemplation of the pleasures of the imagination and the manifestation of beauty. In A Grammar of Motives, Kenneth Burke advanced the human barnyard side of life, the idea of drama, of act, scene, agent, agency, and purpose, with a rhetorical side, the idea of location, never, ever, of triumphalism. The late Richard Rorty did not believe in moral progress as understood traditionally, in contingency, irony, solidarity. He wrote that we should believe in the ability to see more and more traditional differences of tribe, religion, race, customs, and the like as unimportant when compared with similarities with respect to pain and humiliation, the ability to think of people wildly different from ourselves as included in the range of us. His progress is in terms of context, in terms of individualism, aesthetics, dramatism, solidarity, all better places for us to begin. In the field of composition studies, there are also clear directions that lead us away from a history that ends only when we find reflections of ourselves. Published 21 years ago, George Hillockson Research on Written Composition reviewed 500 studies published from 1962 to 1982. The best method to teach writing, his analysis revealed, was the environmental mode. Clear and specific objectives are there, problems designed to engage students in specific processes, important to some aspect of writing, activities such as small group problem-solving tasks, in essence, pursuit through structured tasks in a rich environment. Published just this year, Stephen Graham and Dolores Perrin found that focus on 11 elements of writing have shown clear results for improving writing. Writing strategies, summation, collaborative writing, specific product goals, word processing, sentence combining, pre-writing, inquiry activities, process writing approach, study of models, writing for content learning. These strategies, the meta-analysis performed by the authors reveals, can be combined in flexible ways to strengthen adolescents' literacy development. Recent research conducted by the Educational Testing Service is focusing on a new cognitively based assessment of writing, CBAL. Metaphorically, the CBAL, the writing aspect of it, takes as its aim the reduction of construct underrepresentation in the assessment of writing ability. What, the test developers are asking, would it take to design a comprehensive assessment program that allows fuller construct representation, that measures frequently, and that employs tasks resulting from a robust manifestation of student domain proficiency? With researcher Randy Bennett, the team is currently field testing strategies that ask whether we can rethink assessment as a system so that it adequately serves both local learning needs and national policy purposes. That is, Bennett asks, can we have an assessment system of, for, and as learning? I don't know the answer, he says, but I think that we, as assessment professionals, have a moral obligation to try our best to find out. We must also not fail to recognize the rapidly growing progress of interest and efforts to restructure and reconsider the act of writing. George Landau presented the first truly scholarly treatment of hypertext in 1992. First edition, there is now a 2006 version. As a phenomena, hypertext reconfigures the text, author, writing, narrative itself. Hypertext is a collage writing, an act that decenters the authority and isolation of the writer. As well, I've depicted on this slide our first new textbook that embraces the new media, Leo Dell and Susan Katz's Writing in a Visual Age, a wonderful book for students written by compositionists. The dates on the left-hand side point to significant events, at least in my mind, in this brief history of mediated computer: the great behemoth, ENIAC, in 1949, the capturing of efficiency through computers with Hepburn and Tracy in 1957, desk set. Apple's launched in 79. By 89, 14 million computers in American homes. And of a special interest is the Windows operating system and the birth of the World Wide Web. That metaphor of Windows is of special interest to us. You open your window, you see the other side. Clarity is the order of the day. Writing, it just captures thought, clear as day. It's a transparent entity. Yet transparency is held to be, as J. David Bolter and Diane Gormala term it, a myth. Writing is not there to capture. Writing is there to transform. The structuralist orientation offered by those for whom the object of transparency defines the interactive experience, all this is rejected. It's rejected with precedence. And there is more. Writing is just part of the picture. There are text boxes and visuals and hyperlinks. The media isn't just the message, the media exploits the message, as Kathleen Blake Yancey might say. Indeed, if you go to look for it, it isn't just the link that may be down, the door closed. It may even be more complex than that. It may have changed deliberately from the last time you looked at it on the web. After all, in the dime catch world, exploration is the idea itself. Where on earth is that stable criterion measure that allows us to make interpretations of functional, stable-based performance levels? It's lost in cyberspace. As we say in Northern Jersey, forget about it. The idea, remember, should be to celebrate performance. It is, at the end of the day, one norm-referenced event after another. What is needed, then, is for us to form new definitions of writing in a mediated environment. We need a definition, for example, that allows us to look at this student's e-portfolio, look at her work on photography, and get a sense of how she enjoys capturing images that are visually interesting. These images of tires in snow with the annotation below it are particularly evocative. She says that she took this picture at a tire store, while waiting for new tires to be installed on her car. She loved the way the texture had the tire thread, and if we roll the mouse over it, we can see how she developed that as well. If we would like to, we could even scroll around more on her index and see more of the kind of work that she's doing here in visually mediated communication. As well, we need to be able to design a system of writing in a mediated environment that looks at not just the cognitive, but the affective aspects of writing. Here in one of our graduate students' portfolios, Eugene Green talks about persistence, creativity, pattern recognition, motivation, social political networking, hard work, all things, all effective attributes we know that define success. And he's posted below those examples, exhibits of work that he believes gives good demonstration of his effective attributes. So we need a new definition. My colleagues and I at New Jersey Institute of Technology have defined writing within a digital environment. We think of it as part of an activity that emphasizes elements of visual design in the service of aesthetic aims, an activity that, within a media-rich environment, actively constructs a role for the reader to play and is improved by reflection on its impact. What all of us need to develop, then, is a better sense of writing in a digital environment.